Thank you, Mr. President. So we have one last panel. I am going to need an extra badge, though, to get in the photo shot. Thank you.
You got it.
So we're on our last panel for the day, but as I said before, it is at the heart of what AIB does and its mission, and that is the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. JEDI. And this panel is going to be led by Crystal Ross Smith, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Ameren. Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. As has been mentioned before, I am here to, along with my panelists, bring it home for everybody, to draw the dots and make the connections for you. So stay with us. I hope that we maintain the same level of energy as we go through this conversation with my peers on the panel here. And ask a lot of questions, because we want to answer and give you the responses that you are looking for to better your organizations and help them move forward. So with that, I just want to say that as discussed before, we've all identified hiring, development, promotion, and retention of diverse talent in the energy industry and government sectors as key to our success. As part of any conversation, we have to include justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this continues to be a priority. So during today's panel, we will have a conversation about JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, in the energy industry, specifically discussing recent legislation and how it impacts clean energy and the energy industry as a whole. As mentioned, I am Crystal Smith. I'm Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Ameren Corporation. We are a utility of the Midwest, serving Missouri and Illinois. I have been with the company for 35 years now. I've held various positions throughout the company, but my last role as Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I feel like is a culmination of everything I have done. All of my experiences have brought me to this moment, so I'm very happy and very pleased to be here. So with that, I want to look over to Charles, who's sitting to my left, and Charles, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. My name is Charles Bolden. I'm the Director of Congressional Affairs for the Solar Energy Industries Association. We are comprised of over 1,000 member companies across the nation. We focus on solar, but also solar and storage plus. This is a very exciting day for me. This is my first AIB event, as well as being here amongst my colleagues Zoe and Camille, who we worked for quite some time together on Capitol Hill. So it is definitely an honor and privilege to be here amongst you all.
Thank you, David. Dr. McCoy.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Henry McCoy. I'm the Director of the U.S. Office of State and Community Energy Programs. We are a $16 billion part of the Department of Energy, and we deploy capital throughout the United States and the 5 territories in D.C. and the travel nation. So we have a centerpiece on justice, and I'm actually a former AIB member, and I'd like to go to Houston to the national conference.
Well, I'm sure everybody in this room would say, please come back. You don't have to be a former AIB member, but please come back. Thank you, thank you. Okay, next up we have Zoe.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for sticking around for the panel in between y'all and happy hour. My name is Zoe Kador. I run federal affairs for Calpine Corporation. For those who aren't familiar with us, we're the nation's largest power generator of natural gas and also geothermal resources. We have the largest geothermal facility located just outside of Napa in Sonoma County. So I like to say that we power wine country. And we operate in all the deregulated markets across the country. We have over 76 plants in our fleet, including 13 that comprise the geothermal facilities. For us, we have always been a champion for a cleaner energy future, starting with owning this large fleet of geothermal plants all the way to operating natural gas fleets. But now we're looking more into carbon capture, utilization, sequestration. We're a leader in that space. And so the legislation that was passed with the Infrastructure Act as well as the IRA has been really critical for us to be able to deploy that technology. But that also means that we're going to be able to create jobs, and we're going to be doing projects in communities, and we're going to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's environmentally safe, but also that provides opportunities for communities that look like ours, and that is maintaining equity and justice at the top of everything that we're going to be doing. So looking forward to this conversation and very happy to be sharing the stage with these colleagues of mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. That is really exciting, talking about the future and what it looks like, and we've heard people talk about it all day today. We have the opportunity to be part of that and to look forward and make that change happen, so I'm very excited to hear what you're doing. So last but certainly not least, we have Paula.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paula Parnakian. I'm the Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Eversource Energy. We are the largest utility in New England. I believe we have about 4.5 million customers. I've been there for 8 years and have been leading the DE&I work since that time. And I have to say, I'm not only honored to be here today, to be asked, thank you so much. I'm also very excited because I believe the magic is in the discussion. So I can't wait to get to the Q&A to see what people want to say and want to ask. Because I believe in the power of groups for advancing work, and I agree with all the folks who are talking about this being a transformative moment. So from my vantage point, I've been doing DE&I work for over 30 years. I've been in the utility space for 8 years. I've seen amazing progress in 8 years, especially the last 2 years. And there are so many opportunities for us to move the needle. And there will never be an end to our work. But let's hope we can close that gap somewhat in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great introduction, Paula. I had the opportunity to chat with Paula earlier today, and she really sincerely does want to hear what you want to know. What information can we share with you? So get your questions together as we go through our conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Paula. And I want to talk about what we've experienced this year. So we've had the war in Ukraine, the midterm elections are here, the whole world has seen a huge spike in global energy prices, and the repercussions of inflation are still unfolding. However, with the recent energy policies passed in Congress, there's hope. It's clear that America is focused on clean energy, economic and environmental issues. Do you see a role for the just energy transition in communities, and what is your company doing?
It's remarkable to me, looking back over the last few years, all the momentum and movement within our company and within the industry as a whole. In our company alone, when I started 8 years ago, there was very little understanding about this work. There wasn't a lot of respect for the work. People either got it or they didn't. They either cared or they didn't. We spent a lot of time building a foundation of understanding, slowly but surely, figuring out how to make that happen. And then the summer of protests of 2020 became a call to action. There was a quickening, there was an urgency. And companies like ours and all of ours had to get on board. Excuses were no longer any good. And because of the circumstances of what was happening in the world, the pandemic, people were home, they were watching TV, there was social media, there became a new understanding, I believe, in communities that hadn't really been impacted as to what had been going on for centuries, really. And so our leadership and our company just started moving. Lots of leadership commitment. Once people really understood what the issues were, or better understood, right? Created new positions for equity, created new roles regarding community engagement for siting and planning. Somebody earlier said, working with our communities, not against our communities. There was a thirst and a hunger to really do this right. And we know in this space, it's easier said than done. It really is. We use a lot of cliches and we say we should do this and it better go that way. And organizations like ours have been around for a long time. over 100 years plus, and there are lots of deep-rooted values and processes and ways of doing business that we have to redo. So we jumped on board. We felt the urgency of that. We accelerated our work around equity, justice, and of course continued the D&I work as well, and raised the bar all across the board. We're doing a lot around education. We're educating the whole workforce on what this means and what does it mean to them in their roles. So all leaders are involved in this process. We're having quarterly discussions being rolled out through our leadership groups. So all businesses are having quarterly discussions, and every piece of the business is involved in trying to figure out how are we going to do this differently. So we have there's just a lot of movement. There's a lot of churn. There's a lot going on. And we're seeing the impact of that when people pull together, things can move, and they are definitely moving.
Thank you very much. So as you talk about doing things differently, I'm looking to you, Zoe. So what does your organization see in the just energy transformation?
I'll touch on. Okay. One of the things that we've always been committed to, but we have definitely increased, something that I push for internally, is our supplier diversity. So power plants, natural gas power plants, they're not literally operated by that many people. It probably takes about 20 people to operate a plant, but you're talking millions of hours of contract work that's going to go into building out CCUS and goes into restoring the plant, any type of project that we might have that if there's an outage or what have you. So there's a lot of man hours. And how do we ensure that we are being equitable across the board when it comes to hiring diverse companies and small businesses and employees that represent the communities that we work within? And so we do a great job of having a database where small businesses can apply to be a part of our supplier diversity program. But then let's make sure we're giving people a fair chance. And I can say I've spoken probably a dozen times this year on CCUS work. This is by far the most diverse group I have been a part of course. But I mean, it's sadly, but not surprising, but shocking, how few minority businesses are a part of this conversation, even though the administration has done so much work to ensure that they are able to get a piece of the pie. But a lot of times they just don't know about the opportunities. So they're not coming to the same conferences, they're not at the same meetings, they don't even know who to talk to. People come up to me all the time and I'm like, well, I'm just the GR person, I can't actually hire you, but I can direct you to the right person. So I think it takes all of us, going to where these minority businesses are and making sure that we are letting them know about the opportunities that we have within our companies, because we are aware and we have, we at least have some type of purview of what's going to be happening and coming down the line, and ensuring that the work that's going to be done, all of these hours and hours of work that's going to happen across the industry, to make sure that people that look like us are able to benefit from it.
Thank you. I think everybody in the room heard opportunities. So there are opportunities for us, even though we don't directly do that, have that connection, but the opportunity to connect people with the right people in our organization so that they get a chance. So thank you very much. And I'm going to keep this question with Zoe and Paula. What are some of the key challenges that you face in your industry, whether that's internal or external, right now because of the just energy transformation?
So key challenges would be, right now, the war for talent, right? We have so many open positions, so just finding the talent that we need, replacing the folks that are retiring out. The utility business is generally an older age, tenured business. The differences in the values and the ways of working between the folks that have been there for a long time and the folks who are coming in, a lot of them are Gen Z. So those kinds of cultural differences in the organization. Resources are always an issue. We're a complicated regulated, highly unionized environment, so change is slow. It's very slow because you can't just make a decision and make it happen tomorrow. Some things can be done faster than others. Some things actually take a couple of or several years to make happen. And then, of course, the price of energy right now. That's a huge issue. So in terms of equity, how are we going to take care of our customers right now, since so many families are economically struggling? So those are just some of the challenges.
Thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, for us, and I think for many of our colleagues in the industry, at least the petrochemical side of the industry, there's a huge mistrust, rightfully so, amongst a lot of communities. And so when we start talking about these billion-dollar projects that we want to do that is only going to allow us to continue operating, that's not always falling upon favorable ears because of, the reputation that the industry has and mistakes that have been made along the way. And so for us, we are really working and trying to figure out how do we rebuild that trust, or in some places establish that trust where it wasn't before. And having that trust not only allows us to operate and to build and to get permits done, but to the workforce part, the reality is a lot of people don't want to work in certain industries or certain parts of our sector. And it's not even just oil and gas. Now there are people who are anti-hydrogen, we're anti-wind, we're anti-solar. There's an environmental reason for everything. And so it's an issue. Charles is laughing at me. There are some people who are I know it's hard to believe, but there are some people out here. But the point is, the industry in general, as we all know, these are well-paid jobs where there's a huge lack of African American presence, both from the C-suite down, and we need to ensure that we are making change from within. And that can only happen if we are being hired. And yes, there is definitely a hiring issue within the industry, but there's also just a general disdain for the industry that we really have to work to disprove amongst, the younger generation and some of our colleagues, and just let them know that there are opportunities that exist where they can be successful, working on that company culture so they feel like they want to be a part of it, and then working on the culture within our communities so that they want to see this work happen, because these projects are good. They're going to bring a lot of economic benefit. They're going to bring jobs, but most importantly, they're going to help us maintain reliability while also going into that energy transition. So it's a complicated situation, but we are working to solve it.
If I may chime in on that, the two points that I heard very clear was workforce development and hiring talent. I think when it comes to our generation, or my generation, I should say, is we have to do better at exposing our youth to these opportunities as well. We have to be intentional about where we're committing our time and our focus on when we're talking to these students and when we're talking to the younger generations, to let them know and ensure them that this is a career path that is beneficial and it can change the world, and it is lucrative if you're doing the right things. But also, we have to get these people comfortable in these rooms and put people in position who look like us to go and reach out to these students and these kids and the youth. So I think that's one thing that I've observed over my tenure in the solar industry.
Thank you, Charles. So at the same time, Charles chuckled when Zoe said that people don't want to come into the industry, and I gasped because I'm thinking, 35 years ago, everybody wanted to be part of this industry, but in reality, people are starting to choose careers that they find pleasure and satisfaction and fulfillment in. So you're absolutely right. We have to help them connect those dots to understand what's lucrative about coming to this industry. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so Henry, if I may ask you this next question. How has the federal focus on the energy policies impacted corporate and nonprofit sectors? Have you had any pushback, any communication with people that just really aren't getting it?
No, because we have a lot of money, and when money shows up, everybody shows up, right? I have the opposite problem.
No, not right now.
No, I don't have a problem with anybody having an issue with these resources. As I mentioned, I have in my part of my team, we have $16 billion We have that $6 billion that was from the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed November 15, 2021. And then August 15, 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, which added another $10 billion to my group. We have $100 billion across DOE writ large. And then in terms of clean energy, there's a little over $500 billion across all the federal government agencies. And so there's capital in all kind of places. And so what that has tended to do is, and you know, with the CHIPS Act and things of that nature, it's been so comprehensive that there's resources for almost everybody. I mean, the companies have been happy because there's tax credits and there are investments and things of that nature. Nonprofits have been happy. For the most part, local governments and state governments have been happy. Community-based organizations and folks in the environmental justice movement, they're happy, but they're also waiting to see if this is going to play out the way this conversation has been going. But I will say this, and just thinking about what's been going on. So, you know, let's go back. You know, I'm a part of the Biden-Harris administration. Go back to the former administration, to the Trump administration. The Trump administration actually tried to shut down DOE. And so as part of his administration, they zeroed it out. And you know, of course, both sides of the aisle, you know, did not follow that pathway. This idea of access to opportunity and things of that nature, if you look at some of the last months of the administration, and I'm connecting this because I'm a former academic, and I did some research on the payroll protection program and kind of how that ended up creating a whole lot of, it created bigger gaps in a lot of ways, the way it was distributed. At the end of the last administration, there was actually a directive from the president for OMB, which is the budget office, to actually go in and try to find every contract that talked about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and cancel it if they could. I mean, that was a directive that said, hey, you know, cancel every contract that talks about diversity, inclusion, anything of, you know. So fast forward now, Justice 40, if you haven't heard about Justice 40, Justice 40 is an executive order that President Biden signed the day after he got into office that says that that the goal is to have 40% of federal benefits from programs and dollars go to historically disadvantaged communities. I think about 40% as kind of as a floor, not a ceiling from that standpoint. And so I say that to say that in terms of right now, there's enough for everybody around the table, and it's really a matter of trying to deploy this capital. My task is to deploy it, but I add the caveat to equitably deploy it, right? And so yeah, so corporations happy, nonprofits happy, everybody's happy.
That sounds really good. So one of the questions I was going to ask is if anybody was finding it difficult to implement, long overdue, overwhelming, but it sounds like you answered all of those questions with they're happy to have money.
Well, I will say this, I mean, it can be overwhelming though. I mean, it's a lot of money that shows up at one time, and all of a sudden, and there's always speed. Whenever I was being asked whether I would take this position, you know, I'm the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce in North Carolina. I saw my buddy Curtis Wynn somewhere around here. Hey, Curtis over there. So I'm a former Assistant Secretary of Commerce in North Carolina, and that was during the Obama administration. So the Recovery Act. So you kind of there was money coming from, you know, all kind of places. It was like, look, spend the money now and figure out how to account for it. I mean, it was just like, get the money out. So when they came to me about this role, the conversation was, well, think about the kinds of money that came out during the Recovery Act, but that you have an opportunity to be more thoughtful about it, right? That you have, you know, there's a longer horizon. But at the same time, as my office is a brand new office, so I'm having to stand it up at the same time that I'm under statutory requirements to get the money out. And so it can be overwhelming on both sides of the table, right? I mean, we have some great staff and team members, but again, all of a sudden you have all this money that you have to deploy. You have inspector generals that's over watching you. You have people in the communities watching you. You have everybody watching you. So on the internal side, you have to make sure that you're, I always say, be effective, efficient, and impactful. On the other side, and this gets into this justice question, right? So, you know, this idea of a historically disadvantaged community, which, you know, what that means, essentially black and brown communities, right? I mean, and you go years and decades investment in the community and not kind of building that capacity to absorb money, and then one day you show up and you got all kinds of money. You say, oh, well, look, we have all this money and we want to be equitable now, so hey, where can we put it? And folks are scrambling trying to figure out how to kind of position for that. And then folks say, well, look, we don't have time for that, so we move on. And so, we gave you a shot, but you didn't. But I mean, that's not equity. And so, from that standpoint, yeah, it is overwhelming. And so, for me, it's about doing this right and making sure that what the world, and particularly the country, looks like after the resources go in is dramatically different than what it looked like before.
Thank you very much. I heard a lot of intentionality and planning in what you were saying. And we've heard people say that all day today about being intentional about what you're trying to do. So Charles, I'm looking to you, and I'd like to ask you that same question. With the influx of money, has it been long overdue, right on time, overwhelming? What have you experienced in your industry?
I would say it's a little bit of all of the above. One day you hear about a deal, it's supposed to be on the House floor, it doesn't happen, then the next day you go a week or two without even thinking about it, and the next day it's like, we're on the floor with this vote, so now we got all this money, so then you got all these member companies asking, well, what's going on with this and this and this? And so yes, it has definitely been a little bit overwhelming, but I think the best part about it is that it creates an opportunity to invest in these communities that are disadvantaged, and we can try to create the narrative of what these communities have been disproportionately impacted with their health impacts, whether it's cardiovascular or respiratory. We want to make sure that everyone has solar accessible to them, because what we're trying to do right now is we've made a pledge to create 30% electricity generation by 2030. And what that means for us is that we'll be very, very aggressive in our approach for community solar, for rooftop solar, for utility scale solar projects. But hindsight to that is we need to have some interconnection, we need to have transmission, we need things that the federal government has to take action on furthermore. Because what the investments that we saw through the IRA, it means nothing if we get all of these solar panels and everything on people's houses and things of that nature, but we can't get it accessible throughout the communities. So that is a little bit of our challenge right now, but we are very excited about where the administration has taken us, especially our pledge to basically become 30% of U.S. electricity generation by 2030. So.
Thank you. Again, I heard the word opportunity for all of us in the room. So there's that interconnectivity and an opportunity for all of us to be a part of this. We're going to go back to you, Henry. With the passage of the infrastructure, or the IIJA, I think everybody's familiar with that by now. And more recently, the IRA, Congress has directed a once-in-a-generation investment in America's infrastructure. And it's directed toward communities of color that have been neglected for far too long. What more can we do to make sure that we see the fruits of the labor, that it is implemented? What more can we in this room do? I think we've heard people ask that question. Okay, we've heard about it, we know about it, but what can we do?
Yeah, for the regular, the IIJA is a mouthful. We call it bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's kind of how we reference it, just to let it flow out a little quicker. Yeah, it is a once in a generation, and there's a couple of things that I think are important here. I mentioned before that I did a study on the payroll protection program that came out, during the pandemic shutdown. And if you look at it, the way the money was distributed, it actually created bigger gaps, and wealth gaps, and economic gaps, and things of that nature. So. And so that was under this idea that the first time when the money first came out, they didn't have time to be intentional, right? It's like it just needs to go out. And then there was a second round of money that came out that was focused just on, or supposedly focused on underrepresented groups and things of that nature. Even that money did not end up going in places that it's supposed to go, right? I use that in comparison because, you know, we have this tremendous amount of money that is out now that came about as the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And, you know, if we are not careful, it can have those same effects. So here, think about this. The idea is going to communities and really make investments and decarbonizing those communities and putting solar on houses. We're focused on, oh yeah, I figured Charles would like that. But you know, but also, you know, transforming these communities that have historically not lacked investment. But we've all, I imagine, we've all been in places where communities have been without investment for years, and then investment shows up. And what usually happens? Gentrification, right? Folks get pushed out. We don't need to see that again, right? Where all of a sudden you got all these resources that are targeted for the communities that get access to them, and then that simply prices them out or pushes folk out. And so it's important that we all remain vigilant and advocate in terms of making sure that we're all held accountable. So under these Justice 40 metrics I mentioned, every single place that we send money has to account for those metrics, right? I mean, they have to tell us how is this benefiting these historically disadvantaged communities. My monies go to state governments, local governments, tribal nations, schools, nonprofits. I mean, it goes all around, and folks have to track that. We also integrated into, for the first time, into our application process for both our I mean, you know, in our formula, which goes out to kind of everybody, but also particularly our competitive, that says that you have to put together a community benefit plan before you get access to these monies. And so it basically makes you, it forces you to track that. So I say that to say that you know, what everybody can do is to make sure that you're holding you know, wherever you're from, your governments, your local governments, your state governments accountable, and find out, you know, how they're implementing this equity, their equity plan. Because every single one of these entities, they have to have some kind of equity plan in order to get access to this money. And so it's important that at the end of the day that happens. And I say kind of one thing. So workforce, we have $260 million in my group around workforce development, and that's everything from you know, setting up workforce centers to being able to set up curriculum and courses and things of that nature. I have two kids. I have a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old, so I'm fairly familiar with the generation, right? And I also was, you know, I taught at the university, and part of it is I think that we have to reframe how we talk about this space and this work in a number of ways. You know, we can look at climate in a few different perspectives. On one level, I mean, it is a crisis, right? I mean, you're trying to address issues of what's happened to our planet and things of that nature. But for a very long time, this world of green and that space has been largely kind of a space of kind of self-actualization. So kind of when you get to the top of Maslow's hierarchy, it's like, oh yeah, we want to make the world a better place and cleaner, you know, make, you know, greener, things of that nature. While a lot of folks are still trying to survive at the bottom of that pyramid. The way I always think about it, so when I go into a community, you know, I have no desire to create a bunch of bridges of nowhere. And what I mean by that is that, you know, I don't have a desire to go into a community and say, hey, let's build this LEED certified building, and then everybody around it is still broke and poor, and, you know, but we got this beautiful building here in the middle of you know, nowhere. I think part of it is, I always say that this is a means to an end, right? This whole decarbonization, the climate, and part of that is health. And I mean, I go to communities and the kids that have asthma and they're sick and they can't you know, learn as effectively, but also it's a means to an end to create better lives, upward ladders of mobility, all those things. When you start framing it like that to young people, and particularly, you know, black kids, because of many of them go to college for that, right? They're trying to find a way to help their families and their, you know, their grandma and their mama and their cousins and themselves. When you start framing it like that, hey, this is a means to that end. It may not be basketball, may not be, but it's another means to an end. And I think that helps to spark that fire a little bit more.
Thank you very much. You hit home on so many of the points that you made. So that's why I'm sitting here smiling. And also, by the way, I am so intrigued by everything that's going on that I'm so busy taking notes and I'm trying to remember, I have to keep moving on to the next question. So it's very difficult. So Henry, one more question for you. Are we on track to make change? Climate change. Are we on track to actually hit what we're trying to do?
I think we're moving in the right direction. I mean, there's some really ambitious goals, right? I mean, by the year 2035, I think it's to cut emissions, like 35%. I mean, by 2050, be kind of, totally off of fossil fuels, things of that nature. I mean, so it's a lot. I think that we certainly, in this day and age, are better equipped. We know more than we did before. The climate summit that just happened in Egypt, the countries came together and made commitments that had not been made before. So I think that we are on the path to make change, and we just have to be resilient in the work, because this is hard work. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, and every action creates a reaction, and so as we think about flipping one lever, something else happens, and so I mean, I feel good about it. I think a large part of your context has been around this intersection between energy and justice, right? I think that's the other side of the question, right? Are we on track to really to see the justice aspects of it? And I think it all remains to be seen, because we know that we talked about the George Floyd situation and what happened. I was in Minneapolis about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was with a community group, and they put me on one of those little buses and took me around, and it's something called they called it an environmental justice toxic tour, right? And it was like maybe 10 of us, all African American people from the community. One of the folks on the bus was remember Philando Castile, who got killed, and it was his fiance, the one that was in the car that filmed it. She was with me, and so she was. I mean, it was really an emotional ride, but they took me all around Minneapolis, and they showed me all these places in the black community where they were just toxicities being dumped, right? And so it's a long way to go to get to the point, and we have to make sure that it's more than just lip service, and that it resides. I mean, there's good and bad with kind of everything, right? You have those things. The key is to try to minimize the bad overall, but that when there are bads, they have to be equally shared, right? So we still have ways to go.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing your program.
Interesting question. I'm actually from what we would consider to be an environmental justice community. I grew up outside of Houston. Everyone should come to Houston, best city in the world. But I grew up in a very oil and gas heavy town, like refineries. I remember driving through the city at night and seeing the flaring. As a kid, I thought it was pretty. I was like, oh my God. And now as an adult, I'm like, that's terrible, but it stopped for the most part. So when we say justice, I think we have to also talk about equity. And I think justice is one thing, the environmental side is one thing, but the equity part, are people having the same access and reliability of energy across the board? I was in Houston, Texas during the freeze that happened a couple of years ago, and I can tell you my street had nothing, the street behind me had everything. It made absolutely no sense, and so that was, I think, the first time people really felt, everyone from my CEO to, the janitor, we were all in the dark, in the cold, with no water for a week. And no one was asking, where is the energy coming from? We just need the energy. That's all we care about. Like, people are dying, people have no water, we are freezing, we were literally freezing. We just need the lights to come back on. And so I think that equity piece is another part of the conversation that we can't ignore. And I think we are seeing more investments being done in communities of color when it comes to ensuring that, we're not gonna have a pipeline issue, we're not gonna have a compressor station blow up, we're not gonna have, if there's an issue with the grid where the blackouts are happening, we don't want them to happen, but when they do happen, is it impacting everyone? Like you said, the bad is equitable. I think it is changing, and I think people are realizing, from that reliability standpoint, we need to look at aging infrastructure, not just in affluent areas, but all across the board. Unfortunately, it takes sometimes an entire system shutting down and then realizing the connection amongst the supply chain for some people to say, well, actually, I do need to care about this community because that can impact my community. So the way we're getting to the end may not be the most genuine, but I do think either by Mother Nature or by wars, people are starting to finally wake up. So then for us, that means that we are making sure we're a part of those conversations. And so that when we're looking at where are we doing our projects, where are we hiring our contractors, even something as small as where are we going to put all of these community donations? Because now, from George Floyd into now, and then with the mandates from the federal government, everyone is looking at money to throw at community organizations. Some people might say like, oh, we don't like that, they're not being genuine. I say, look, if I can help my local Boys and Girls Club or the Urban League or the NAACP or my college with this pot of money, we're just gonna say thank you and we're gonna keep it moving. Unfortunately, everyone doesn't have someone that is from our community inside of their company or in a position to where they can push for that. And so this is kind of where the aid part comes in, making sure that we are being that advocate for companies that don't have anyone, and being that advocate in cities where we may not have as robust as a presence of minorities in this industry, to make sure that the resources and these corporations are actually spreading them out fairly. And I'll give one example. I was speaking to another company in Houston. There's an energy school. I live in 3rd Ward, which if you're familiar with Houston, it's a historic Black neighborhood. They put an energy school, quote unquote, in the neighborhood. The energy school has maybe less than 10% of African American students, even though the entire area surrounding it is African American students, and there's like less than 10%. It's a magnet school. And this company was like, oh my gosh, we're just so happy. We gave all this money to this school to help minorities. And I was like, you do realize, did y'all like look at the chart of students? There are not minorities at this school. The minorities are at the public school down the street. That's really where the resources needed to go. So like, thank you for giving to this school, but if your goal is to help minority children and to expose them, you kind of missed the mark. And they were just like, oh, dang, I didn't know that. So, yeah, you know, I won't knock them for it, but had we not had that conversation, they just would have wrote the check, gone about their way, thought they had done something to help the environment and the community and all these things, and really they didn't push the needle. And I'm seeing that with a lot of corporations that don't have somebody internally. So my charge to everyone is to just make sure you're working with your colleagues across the country, across your communities. I know here in DC, Charles and I and most of the federal lobbyists have left, but we communicate a lot and try to make sure that the work that we're doing internally is also reflecting positively externally, and where we can help each other and help our community as a whole, we're trying to do that. And so I think all of us, we're all connected enough, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We all have access to someone to make sure that resources are going throughout the country in a way that's equitable, but in a way that's really actually impactful.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful. I think we all are just really surprised that in this day and age, when projects and conversations like that are being held, that you don't have diversity in the room to make sure that every particular blind spot has been unveiled. So you don't have any oopses or surprises like that. So that is a big wow.
I mean, I'd like to also piggyback on something in this idea of environmental justice, because we hear it like all the time, environmental justice, environmental justice. I think for me at least, you can't separate this notion of justice from economics, right? And so it's got to go beyond, you know, that this kind of feel-good situation of, hey, yeah, we know that you're kind of choking on the air and things of that nature, and you know, we're going to work on that. It's got to go toward economic justice as well. And so even as I look at how we deploy our capital, you know, I mentioned we have $260 million for workforce development, and again, that's just in my group. So there's all kinds of money across Department of Labor, other places like that. In the work that we do, for me, we also have to talk about entrepreneurship, right? I mean, who actually owns the business that's doing the work? If you want to put a workforce in, I mean, the data shows you that you know, people who, you know, as much as we want to kind of kumbaya, I mean, people hire people from their networks. And so whenever white people start business, they hire more white people. When black people start business, they hire more black people. When women start businesses, they hire more women on average than others. And so if you want to address these issues that were these kind of tangential issues, it can't just be about, and I think you mentioned about showing up and saying, oh, well, you sit over on the sideline, we're going to do this for you, and we're going to make it real pretty, and you're going, well, I mean, it's got to be, autonomous power and ownership, and there's got to be some wealth creation. I mean, I look at our organization, and I have these kind of 4 W's that I talk to my team about. Warmth, workforce, wisdom, and wealth, right? One part is, we do have services like weatherization, so when somebody need to make folks' homes warmer in the winter and cool in the summer and all those kind of basic things. The workforce piece, how do we create opportunity that are both jobs as well as ownership? The wisdom piece, how do we do it smarter, right? How do we get smarter as we're doing it? So we should be getting smarter every time we put money out. Equitably, we should be getting smart about how we're doing it. But then the wealth piece, I tell folks all the time, we can't go to a community and on one side of the town we have a ribbon cutting for weatherization, which is, kind of going in and working with low-income folk, and then on the other side of town we have, a ribbon cutting for a manufacturing facility. You gotta have, there's gotta be some kind of equity around that. Environmental justice has to go beyond kind of feel good into the economics of it.
Thank you. Charles, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in addition to what was said earlier, the question was, have I seen environmental justice change? Honestly, I will say I have not visually seen it, but I feel the change. And I say that because we have, when I was working on Capitol Hill, we would have the kids come in, the students, and they would come in fired up. They were like, what are you doing for our neighborhood? What are you doing for our country? And I would be freaking out like, oh my gosh, I can't make these kids mad. But I say all that to say, it makes me feel good to know that at an age like that, they're aware. Because I don't think at that age I was aware, and so that makes me feel a lot better about where our country is going. Again, with the environmental justice piece, I think that I have to ask this question because it is so important to me about making a connection, a personal connection, whether it's an organization, whether it's a group of you all, whether it's an individual effort to go out and connect with your community. And I say that because I've been going around challenging organizations and business leaders like, well, what are you doing as far as the community in which your business is and community in which you do a lot of business in? Are you going back doing co-drives? Are you bringing your staff to feed the homeless? Are you connecting with that community? And I think that will go a lot longer way to expose these underserved communities and just show where we are as a renewable energy sector, where we are as people, as decent human beings, to give back to the community in some capacity and expose these kids and let them know, like, this is something that you can do, but it's going to take all of us. It's not just going to be one industry. It's not going to be one person. It's going to be a multitude of people. And I think that that's the big part that we're missing, is that human connection with one another, with ourselves, and then with the earth in whole. So again, like while I say I have not personally seen a lot of environmental justice changes, I've witnessed a little bit, but the thing that makes me motivated now is knowing that there are students who will curse me out if I'm not doing my job. So.
Thank you. Those are our future leaders, and I think we talked about that a little bit earlier today. We were talking about, the future. Well, the future is here. And the people that we are bringing up are making those changes. So thank you. And then I heard a challenge from Charles too, to make sure that we are connecting, that human factor, that we are connecting with our communities. We talked earlier today, one of the things I know my organization does, Green Share, are our community voices. We bring them in and we ask them, we talk to them about what we're doing and what we're planning to do, and then we ask them what are their needs. And we try to make sure we're addressing those as we move along. So I want to ask you, Paula, earlier today you and I were talking about environmental justice communities. Can you expand a little bit on what you're doing, what your organization is doing with the environmental justice communities?
Yes. So there's a lot of focus throughout the organization on justice and equity, and especially in the environmental justice communities themselves. So everything we're doing, we're putting through the equity lens. And we are working more in a more focused way, for example, in our transmission business, as we're starting to, as we continue communities, but especially the EJ communities, to make sure that we are bringing them into the process at the beginning and working with them to come up with the solutions for where we're trying to go. Whereas before, you know, we did our thing, you know, lots of bad stuff happened to some communities, and now we're working with them to say, you know, we need to bring in more energy, more power, we need to move this substation, or we need to move this line. How shall we do it? How can we work better together? So that's huge. That's huge. We're also taking a look at the impact of the bill and who it's impacting and how it's impacting, and what are we going to do to make sure those folks stay warm over the winter. That is not a minor matter. So we're looking at the EJ communities, especially. We're looking at all communities, but especially the EJ communities. I liked, Henry, I liked your four, were they all W's?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I like the way you were thinking about that to take a look at all pieces of the business and to say, how can we do a better job supporting our communities?
Thank you. So for all of you, this next question is, how can businesses and the federal government work together better to ensure that the principles of environmental justice are carried out in our communities? You know, you know, we don't always work together, the corporations and the federal government. So how can we work together to be on the same team to make sure that this is happening?
I know for me, from the federal government side, and I've been on the business side as well, it is about, I mean, the complexity of this work requires everybody at the table, right? I mean, there's a place at the table for public, private, philanthropic, I mean, just across the board. In terms of the private and the public, there are things that businesses just do a lot better than the government in terms of, you know, kind of being in the marketplace and creating jobs and things of that nature. I know from my standpoint, you know, this gets back to this challenge around you know, the workforce and things of that nature, is that money's across every agency you can think about in government, right? HUD and DOT and I mean, you know, EPA, Justice, and all, I mean, money's across the board. And so really there's, regardless of what your skill set is or your business, I mean, it should be someplace to plug in. So the thing for me that is so important when it relates to, you know, the impact on historically disadvantaged communities or black and brown communities, however you want to frame it, is businesses that get stood up that can actually be kind of on the ground game, right? That can, because I mean, those are the ones who hire folks, they're the ones who again create wealth and things of that nature. And so the way the interplay happens is, I encourage folk, this is gonna sound like I'm going off top, I'm gonna just say this kind of quickly though, but it kind of has us to now. So I don't know how many of y'all saw Wakanda Forever, right? So I saw it when it came out. When Black Panther first came out a few years ago, you know, I witnessed what everybody else witnessed, right? Folks showing up at the theater with, you know, kind of dressed up and all kind of gear and things of that nature. And it was kind of a fascinating thing. I used to do I did a study called In Search for Wakanda. And so basically, what I was trying to figure out was that, you know, by all economic means, Black Panther was like the most successful black franchise of all time, period. It was also one of the most successful franchises, period, in terms of the capital and things of that nature. So I wanted to figure out, well, how much of that actually was, you know, what is the benefit to the black community? So when I looked at it, I found that from a standpoint of pride and all those kind of things, it was tremendous, off the chart, right? From a standpoint of economics, not so much. very little of the money went from the Black Panther actually went into the Black community. And so it shows you that even at the height of kind of the most popular franchise around it, that very little went into the community. And the reason why is when you look at the industry breakdown, the industries that were a part of the ecosystem of the movie business and all that comes out of it, you just don't have many Black people in them. And so what's happening right now with energy is that even with this justice piece, you have, it's hard sometimes to find businesses that we can pull in and say, hey, this business can make it onto the GSA schedule, which is how we have to deploy capital. And so I say all that to say that I'd love to see many more, Black businesses that get started and grow and scale that can then be on the other side of these opportunities that we have, because we have a tremendous amount of our resources that will ultimately go into folks that want to build manufacturing plants and folks that want to do these things that are straight up private sector. And again, the way the resources work, it doesn't matter who owns the business, because who owns the business impacts who gets internships, who gets hired, what charities get the money, all those things, and who makes money, the wealth. So for me, it's that straightforward. I need more businesses on the other side of the table.
Thank you. I think I heard Zoe say earlier that they do a supplier diversity showcase or introduction.
Yeah, well, internally we have it's a supplier diversity spotlight. Because, as I mentioned, we have 76 plants across our fleet. We operate everywhere from Canada down to Mexico. So I have colleagues that have never met each other and they've been at the company for 20 years. So how can you expect them to know every single candidate in our supplier diversity chain? So that, that's just one of the many exercises you can do internally to make sure that those who are doing the hiring are meeting those people. To your question, I think it's interesting. My job as a federal lobbyist is to bug the federal government. So I do that very well, I think. But a lot of people, we bug our members of Congress, and then when the legislation is passed, then it's like, okay, we'll let the federal government just figure it out. And that's actually not how the process works. The administrative process is supposed to be inclusive, and we are supposed to be a part of it. They are guiding the country to implement these rules, but we are the subject matter experts to some extent, and we have to make sure that we are providing our input, that we are reaching out to them. They have email addresses, very accessible on the internet. There's also so many resources on the websites. Like DOE has done a great job of just literally laying out how you apply for the funding, who is eligible for the funding, who is not eligible for the funding, how much funding is available. But you'd be surprised how many questions I hear at different places, like, it's literally on the website. So everyone may not know that. So we need to make sure that people are aware of that, and that and just kind of helping take down this curtain that you can't talk to the federal government. And I think especially for more of the oil and gas side of the industry, I think there's sometimes this thought that they don't want to work with us, or if you don't work for a larger corporation that might be used to interacting with the government, you may feel like you're going to have a closed door. And I've worked everywhere from the American Petroleum Institute to other places, and I've never experienced that. So I think it really does, we have to be willing, they want us at the table, as he's saying. We have to be willing to go to the table, and we have to be proactive. The other thing is when we are talking to them, we are the ones who operate in these communities, and so we know, especially for our operations, we are the ones really who know best about how this is going to work, what the impacts are, what are the challenges, what are the things that we need to make sure that we are preventing from happening, and we need to be honest about that so that they can help us and not be afraid to just talk about the bad parts, because for all operations across the entire industry, there's going to be some bad that occurs. And a lot of times we don't want to be upfront about that, but we have to be upfront so that we know what the challenges are, so that we can find the solutions. And quite frankly, so that when something bad does happen, they're not blindsided, because when they're blindsided, that's when I think things really become an issue, and then your company ends up in the paper. So, there's a lot of prevention that has to take place, and that really comes simply from being willing to communicate with the people in these agencies.